So, guys, training camp is finally here. The rookies have already reported, and now all eyes are on the veterans as they get ready to join camp, and the real competition officially begins. Over the next few weeks, every player on this roster will be fighting for a role, and every decision the coaching staff makes could have a huge impact on the 2026 season. Most fans are focused on the wide receivers, the pass rush, or the biggest rookie storylines. But quietly, there are two position battles that could end up being more important than all of them. If Washington gets these decisions right, they'll put themselves in a much stronger position heading into the season. But if they don't, it could create problems on both sides of the ball even before week 1 arrives. So let me break down the two massive training camp battles that could make or break the Commanders' 2026 season. What's up, Commanders Nation? Welcome to the NFL Playbook, Commanders. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. All right, let's start on offense, because this is the battle that nobody's really talking about, and it might be the most important one on the whole roster. Everybody wants to talk about who's catching passes behind Terry McLaurin or who's leading the running back room. Look, those things matter. I'm not saying they don't. But none of it is going to matter if the interior of this offensive line isn't right. I'm talking about the left guard, the center, and the right guard. The guys who barely get mentioned but who honestly control almost everything that happens up front for Jayden Daniels. Think about it this way. Those three guys handle the protection calls, they handle the exchanges under center, they set the tempo for the run game, and they're the first line of defense against interior pressure. If that group isn't communicating well, none of the flashy stuff on the outside is going to matter, because Jayden Daniels is going to be running for his life before any of those routes even develop. The left guard job, though, that one's a little more interesting. Brandon Coleman brings more movement ability and more upside as a younger player entering year 3. Chris Paul brings the size, the physicality, and honestly the proof, because he stepped in last year and played well when Washington needed him. So this isn't some easy call. Here's my take, though. I think organizationally the best outcome for Washington is for Brandon Coleman to win this job, and to win it clearly, not some close nail-biter type of race, but a real separation between the two guys. Why does that matter so much? Because this coaching staff invested resources into him. They drafted him in the 3rd round back in 2024, and if he wins the job convincingly, that gives Washington a young athletic offensive line piece they can build around for years. Not just for one season. But don't sleep on Chris Paul either, because there's a real chance he wins this job simply by being the better football player right now. He already has chemistry with Laremy Tunsil from playing next to him most of last season, and he's shown he can hold up in both the run game and in protection. If Chris Paul wins this battle, it tells you Washington is prioritizing production over potential, and that's not a bad thing either. And hey, let's not completely rule out a wild card here. There's a name like Matt Gulbin who could come in and just surprise everybody at center. I don't think that's the most likely outcome, but in training camp, weirder things have happened, so we have to at least mention it. There's also a bigger picture piece to all of this that I think gets overlooked. If Brandon Coleman wins clearly, that gives Washington a young core up front they can plan around for years, guys like Josh Connerly Jr. On one side, Brandon Coleman a guard, Sam Cosmi somewhere in that mix, and Laremy Tunsil holding down the tackle spot as the veteran anchor. That's the kind of foundation good offensive lines are built on. But if this competition drags on and stays messy all the way into the season, it becomes a problem Washington has to keep solving year after year instead of just this year. So honestly, how clean this battle gets resolved matters just as much as who actually wins it. Now, whatever combination Washington goes with up front, it needs to be about what works best together, not just picking the younger guy or the guy who played well last year just because. The chemistry, the communication, and how these guys mesh together in David Blough's system, that's what's actually going to decide how much room Jayden Daniels has to work with this season. All right, now let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball, because this next battle is honestly just as important, maybe even more important long term. I'm talking about the safety room, and specifically how versatile these guys can become for Daronte Jones' defense in 2026. Now, when we talk about versatility at safety, I don't just mean a guy who can play multiple spots on the field. That's actually a pretty shallow way to think about it. A truly versatile safety is one whose job on a given play can't be figured out by the quarterback before the snap even happens. That's the real definition, and honestly, it's going to matter a ton for how aggressive this defense can be this season. We know the defensive coaching staff wants to show one picture before the snap and then completely flip it after the ball is snapped. Maybe they show cover 2 and rotate into cover 3. Maybe they show pressure and then drop into coverage instead. The whole thing works only if every single defender on the field is selling that same disguise. And that's where the safeties become honestly the control room for this whole defense. Think about everything these guys have to do. They're aligning the defensive backs, they're adjusting the motion, they're communicating checks to each other, they're figuring out where the offense is trying to create an advantage, and then after the snap, they still have to rotate cover tight ends. Fit the run, or even blitz. It's a ton of responsibility, and honestly, I think there's 3 specific roles these guys need to fill for this defense to really take off. First, you need a communicator, someone who gets the whole secondary aligned and connected. I think Will Harris fits that role really well. Even though he battled injuries for most of last season, when he was actually out there, you could tell how much he stabilized things. He's the guy who keeps this whole thing from turning into total chaos. Second, you need range, someone who can protect the deep part of the field and cover for mistakes made by the corners underneath. That's where Nick Cross comes in. Now, a lot of people think of him as just a box safety, a guy who likes to hit and be around the line of scrimmage, and sure, he's great at that. But don't sleep on his speed and his range, because that's what allows this whole defense to be more aggressive with its pressure packages. And third, you need the chess piece, the guy who can line up anywhere, disguise what he's doing before the snap, and match up with tight ends or running backs depending on the situation. That, to me, is exactly what Quan Martin brings to the table. This is a guy whose whole college profile at Illinois was built around doing exactly this kind of thing. And honestly, he just hasn't really been asked to do it much in the NFL yet. Here's the thing though, if these three guys, Nick Cross, Quan Martin, and Will Harris, can really overlap in these roles, the quarterback on the other side of the ball is not going to know who's rotating deep, who's coming down to the line, or who's bringing pressure. And when a quarterback has to hesitate, even for a split second, that's when the pass rush wins. And don't forget about Jeremy Reaves either. He's another name that's flown a little under the radar, but from what we've heard, the coaching staff has been raving about him behind the scenes. We haven't fully seen how he fits into this rotation yet, but if he can add even more overlap to these three roles, it just makes the whole safety group that much harder for opposing quarterbacks to read. I actually think Nick Cross could end up being the bridge between this defense's floor and its ceiling this year. If he can handle deep coverage on his own, that frees up Quan Martin to move closer to the formation and become that unpredictable matchup piece. And it lets Will Harris be used more strategically instead of carrying every single communication responsibility by himself. That combination is honestly what could unlock Quan Martin from what's basically felt like a safety prison the last few seasons, especially now that he's entering a contract year. So when you put it all together, these two battles, the interior offensive line and the safety room, might not get the headlines that the wide receiver competition or the pass rush rotation gets. But if Washington gets these two things right, it changes everything for this team. A strong interior line gives Jayden Daniels the protection and rhythm he needs to actually let this offense grow. And a versatile safety room gives this defense the disguise and deception it needs to become genuinely dangerous. Get these two things wrong, though, and it doesn't matter how good the skill players look on paper because none of it is going to show up the way it should on Sundays. Protection up front and disguise on the back end, those are the kinds of things that don't always trend on social media, but they're the kinds of things that actually decide games in December and January. So as training camp rolls on these next few weeks, keep your eyes on these two rooms. Because I honestly think they're going to tell us more about this Commanders season than almost anything else happening on this roster right now. That's it for today's video, guys. Let me know down in the comments which of these two battles you think is more important for this team. I'll catch you in the next one.